you're going to do logistics stuff.
I think we should start just so that we can stay on track with regardless of time. I hope you're all awake this morning after your wonderful dinner last night, because I think today's keynote is going to prove to be very interesting. Today we have the privilege of having Michele Kimpton address us in our keynote. Michele Kimpton is Chief Executive Officer of Duraspace and one of the founders of the organization. Duraspace was formed in July 2009 and was the coming together of both the Dspace Foundation and Fedora Commons. Duraspace is a not-for-profit organization that provides guidance and support for open source software projects Dspace, Fedora, and recently DuraCloud. Michele sets the strategic direction for Duraspace with the executive team and members of the board. She was recently named Digital Preservation Pioneer by the NDIPP, which is the National Digital Information Infrastructure and Preservation Program at the Library of Congress. Before joining Duraspace, Michele was the founder of the Dspace Foundation, a not-for-profit organization set up to provide leadership and support to the community of users of the Dspace open source software platform. Now, because a lot of you use Dspace, you'll be interested to know that currently there are over 1,000 installations worldwide using Dspace software. Prior to joining Dspace, Michele was the director at the Internet Archive for 5 years. In her role, she worked closely with national libraries, archives, and universities to provide technical expertise and services in web archiving. She has developed partnerships with several of these institutions to collaborate on web archiving activities, including being one of the founding members of the International Internet Preservation Consortium. Today, she's going to talk about the future of repositories and the impact of the cloud. She's going to look at new challenges for managing content, and she's going to ask the question, as libraries become tasked with being the steward for an increasing amount of digital content, what role do repositories play, and how will they seamlessly fit as part of the digital landscape? Please join me in welcoming Michele Kimpton to the podium.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Janine, and thanks for everybody for showing up this morning to listen to the presentation. It was really an exciting evening last night, and I'm particularly enthralled with those of you that have come, that actually took the second bus last night. I heard there was lots of dancing to be had. So I'm very honored to be asked here by the organizing committee to tell you a little bit about what Duraspace does, but more importantly about what we see as the vision for the future. Obviously, we deal with large communities of users that are using both Dspace and Fedora, and really, in general, academic libraries and institutions that are tasked with being the stewards for their cultural heritage materials and really preserving the scholarly record. First, for those of you who are not familiar, though, I'll tell you a little bit about Duraspace. Duraspace, as Janine mentioned, was established in 2009, and we really provide the support and guidance around the open source technologies, Dspace, Fedora, and most recently, DuraCloud. Many think that we actually produce and develop those technologies, but these communities are truly open source in that they participate in the development of the platform, working with us to set the direction for those technologies, and also enabling others in the community to use those technologies. Today, I'm going to talk about what we think at Duraspace the roadmap for repositories are moving into the future, and really with the goal of providing persistent access to the scholarly record. So I know many of you are getting up and running by getting your ETDs on the web, whether you do that in a repository or a content management system or other types of systems, and many of you are focused on open access, and that is certainly important. But really, as stewards of the content, we must also consider how are we going to persist that content over time? How are we going to make sure it lives beyond a single individual or a single institution, and make sure that that content is available regardless of what system that we store it in today, that it will transcend time and be there for future generations. So our mission at Duraspace is that we're committed to providing these open source technologies and to promote durable, persistent access to the scholarly record. and really doing that today through offering Dspace and Fedora open source repositories, and most recently DuraCloud, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. And we're really an umbrella organization for these open source technologies, and we're looking to expand our open source portfolio to add other technologies that really serve the community in achieving this mission. Both these projects, if you're not familiar, Dspace and Fedora, have been around for quite a while. Both of them are roughly 10 years old. For those of you not familiar with Fedora, the project was initiated as a collaboration between University of Virginia and Cornell. And really the focus of the Fedora platform was to build a framework, a technology of components which would allow institutions to build complete digital libraries, not just for managing one type of content, be it ETDs, but also to manage images and special collections and newspapers and digitized books, and be able to customize the workflow for all these different types of content and customize the interface. So really much more of an enterprise system. And Fedora has been very successful in larger research organizations and academic libraries that really are using it as a digital library. Dspace, which also started about 10 years ago around the same time, was a partnership between MIT and Hewlett-Packard. And Dspace was really developed with the intent of providing a system for libraries to manage the digital research output coming from their faculty and students. And so it was developed really primarily with the requirements of libraries and the workflows as dictated by libraries. And it has been very successful as really a turnkey application for setting up institutional repositories for libraries for managing the scholarly record and research output. Both of those projects, about 5 years ago, spun out into not-for-profit organizations, one being the Dspace Foundation and the other being the Fedora Commons organization. And it became apparent as those nonprofits were formed that it was really creating a competitive environment in the library and academic community, where people were saying, well, which platform should we use, and how are they different, and how should we support both organizations? So about 2 years after those nonprofits were formed, myself being executive director of Dspace and Sandy Payette being executive director of Fedora Commons came together to form Duraspace, a single organization to really serve the entire community regardless of what platform they were using for persistent access to the scholarly record. Today, the community that we serve is over 1,200 strong. There are roughly 1,000 known registered installations of Dspace. There are over 200 known registered installations of Fedora. And our primary community is academic libraries and archives and research organizations. But we work with many organizations to collaborate on our goals of persisting the scholarly record, whether they are other nonprofits, whether they're commercial organizations or academic institutions. And Dspace, even though it's been 10 years old, it continues to gain adoption. Every month we have anywhere from 30 to between 20 and 50 new Dspace instances. And we've really seen an uptick in Dspace instances with the open access movement. Sorry, some technical difficulties here. There we go. If we look at Dspace instances around the world, we see that, is that working? Yeah, okay. We see that they're not only in North America, but we have significant presence in Europe and in Asia. And we also have a significant installed base, and I'm talking just Dspace right now, in Africa. So 47 known instances. It's been great to talk to many of you that are using Dspace here at the conference, and also to talk with members of the community that are really promoting and advocating for open repositories and giving training and workshops on Dspace. So I know that there are many more instances coming up and online in preparation for the Open Access Conference or Open Access Movement, which is in October. So that's really, really very exciting. And really the software is really just enables the open repository, but the benefits really come from the participation of the community. So both of these open source platforms have thriving communities, and the communities really own the project, as I stated. So with Dspace, there are 14 committers. These are developers that write code and also commit the code to the project. Only one of them works at the Duraspace organization. The other 13 are from institutions, academic institutions primarily around the world. And we have many groups that are associated with the community. There is an ambassadors group. There are 2 ambassadors that I know of here in Africa, one in Ghana and the other in Kenya, and they really help others get up and running on Dspace, and they run training workshops, and they answer questions, and they provide guidance to users. There is a Dspace workshop at Stellenbosch University that's being run by Ina, who's a big Dspace advocate, and these are things that the community is doing on their own with really minimal support from the Duraspace organization, but out of their passion and their understanding of the platform and their wanting to work together as a community. So as I mentioned, both these platforms are about 10 years old, and really they were coming into their first release of the software just after Google really became the browser, the search engine of choice on the web. So if you think about it, initially much of the focus was getting your digital content and providing access to it up online, but there weren't many web-enabled tools at the time to really promote that content, to make it easy to find, and to really do more with your content. So if you look over the past 10 years, the evolution of digital content that's on the web and what you can do with that content has evolved in ways that we could never have imagined when these repository software applications were initially created. And so the expectations as a result of what our users expect to do has really changed over time. They expect to be able to easily download content, tag content, annotate the content, because they're using these types of applications in their everyday lives on the web. And we, as stewards of the content and running repositories, must figure out how do we deploy those capabilities and make sure that the same types of features are available with our own content so that it can be shared and tagged and available in places other than our repository, so people can reuse it and mix it and build their research upon what others have done. So moving forward, as we work with our communities to really advance repositories and advance these platforms, we need to consider the direction of what our users, be it our faculty and our students, are expecting. So we need to consider that our repositories need to be more distributed, that we can't just isolate the content within our own IT, within our own academic universities, only available to those that are on campus. We must be able to open our content and have it available in other places where users and staff and faculty might also go. We need to consider being more collaborative. Many of us know we have tightened our budgets, we have reduced staff, and we're trying to manage larger and larger amounts of content and also persist that content over time. And it's very difficult for any single institution to do that. So we need to consider, how do we work with others in our fields, in our regions, in the academic network to do more with less and be more efficient about it. We need to be more web-oriented. And not only is it imperative for us to provide open access and put it online, but also to connect with other web technologies that are available where faculty and students and researchers are creating the research, as well as where they expect to find the research down the road. So applications that are on the web, such as Dropbox and Facebook, and educational tools such as Moodle and OpenCourseWare. We need to connect our repositories to those technologies where masses of users are going and also using those tools. We need to continue to push to be more open, because if our content is not open, it will be very difficult to persist it in the future, because it will not have the exposure that people are expecting when you're spending money and time to preserve something. So we think that really access, or preservation I should say, goes hand in hand with access. So continuing to drive to make that content open, to make it available for download, to make it available for annotation, and to be able to build on that work is important. And lastly, we need to make sure our repositories are interoperable. So when you consider setting up a repository, you need to look at what is the technology you're choosing, how big is the community. If you go with a commercial company or a privatized company, what will you do if that company goes out of business? How will you persist that content? How easy is it to get out of that system and into another system? And so making sure that the systems that you choose are interoperable and striving towards interoperability is an important future goal. So some of the things that we've seen in the past, particularly with larger institutions, is that when they first established repositories, they really spent a lot of time within the institution building customizations and features that were specific to their community and typically only available to the community. But what we are advocating for the Duraspace organization and trying to push the technologies to is to not build a repository island, but to really consider what features and functionalities you can embed in your repository to connect with the web, to make your content more exposed and more available, and to make it more accessible to others. And these are, really just a sampling of other web-enabled applications, repositories that are out there that your staff and faculty and users are finding content and are doing more with that content. So we choose to promote access to the scholarship globally, even though we steward the content locally. And so a lot of what's in Duraspace, what we're doing with the technologies is making sure that there are what we call programmatic interfaces to many of these applications to really make it easy for you as the steward of the content to connect with these applications, either to improve the workflow of the student when they're using and depositing their content into the repository, and once the content is available, to make it accessible to a much larger audience by pushing it in other places like Flickr or iTunes or YouTube, which have very large audiences. This is just an example of the recent Dspace release. This is a bunch of podcasts that were done by Ohio State University. They have these podcasts in their repository, but they also have pushed them into iTunes University. And with Dspace, the latest release, which is 1.8, which is coming out in October, there is what's called an Rss Feed, which can be configured to automatically push all of your podcasts and all your multimedia, or portions of that, depending on your communities and collections, into iTunes U. So it's just an example of getting your content out there and getting exposed to the masses. So we believe as repositories become more connected to the web and have the features and functionalities that our users are expecting and working with in their everyday situations, that it will be difficult to really distinguish which are repositories, which are applications. And so here is, a picture of where you've got iTunes University, you've got Google Digitized Books, you have Internet Archive, you have Dspace instances, OpenCourseWare, and all of these places are managing content, and many times academic content that is part of the scholarly record. So we envision that the repositories that we are putting up today, Dspace, Fedora, ePrints, what have you, that is persisting part of the scholarly record, are really part of a much larger system, woven into the web, where people can easily find and access content not only from a single institution repository, but multiple institutional repositories. And they can find that not only at the site of the academic institution, but they can also find it in other places on the web, such as iTunes U, or OpenCourseWare, or YouTube. So that is really our vision in terms of the direction we feel that repositories should go, to be part of a network of repositories to increase exposure and access and build it into the workflow of our users. We've also noted that there is an emerging technology which has become available over the last couple of years, and it's cloud technology. And we feel that this will really enable many more institutions to really do more with their content and do more than they could have in the past, because it reduces the barriers to getting your content up and online and accessible via the web. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the cloud, I always like this definition by Gartner. It's a style of computing which is massively scalable, IT related, that you can provision as a service over the internet. So what this means is that you can buy storage, compute, and bandwidth as a service, that you don't have to set up your own hardware and systems internally in order to start running an application, in order to store data. You can actually buy it as a commodity. And we think that because of this, computing resources are really going to become ubiquitous, just like electricity, that people are going to stop building their own IT centers at some point and really just buy compute and hardware as a commodity, because it will be much more cost effective and efficient to do that as opposed to setting up all these individual IT resource centers. And many of you are probably using cloud services today. There are really three types of services. You can have software as a service, infrastructure as a service, and platform as a service. So software as a service is something like Gmail, where Google has set up a mail account for you. All the mail that you receive, you access through the internet. It's on a server, you don't know where it is. You can view it, you can send it, but you really download it to your client desktop. So all the processing and storage is all taking place in a data center on servers that's accessible via the internet. The cloud services that are most interesting to us is really infrastructure as a service. And this is where you are able to provision, as I mentioned, compute, storage, and bandwidth as a service, pay as you go, pay on demand. So if you've run out of storage, you need to store content, you can provision gigabytes of storage in these cloud centers, and the cost can be as low as 10 cents a gigabyte a month. And if you look at that compared to maybe what's your cost of storing that content in your local IT center, it can be orders of magnitude cheaper. And that is because these data centers are large in scale, they're using virtual technology, and they can really get efficiencies across a massive amount of computers that would be very difficult for you to achieve on your own. So there are several commercial players which are offering these cloud services. Amazon was really the leader in the industry, followed by Rackspace, followed by Microsoft. And they've primarily set up these large data centers in North America, in Europe, and in Asia. So to date, I actually don't know of any that are in Africa, but it's not that, that it will not get here over time, because they are continually expanding. And this is just really the commercial. There are many, many, many private and government cloud centers that are emerging. And we also see that potentially in our space, in the academic space, we're starting to see consortiums, so institutions coming together to set up cloud-based data centers. And there's some projects going on in the US, at UC San Diego, and at University of Chicago, that are really making headway here. So providing compute and storage as a service, pay as you go, not having to provision it upfront. So when we started to look at cloud technologies, Duraspace, we really wanted to understand from our academic community of users what they understood of the cloud, what they thought maybe some key advantages, some challenges were of using the cloud, and what they might consider using cloud technologies for. We had an idea, but we really wanted to validate our thinking through our community. So this was a survey. It was done in 2002, or 10, but I think the answers really still hold true. So some of the key advantages that our community cited, and this was a higher education survey through the Dspace and through our communities. Key advantage of cloud was the scalability and the flexibility, and also the ability to push content off campus. So in persistent access and preservation of materials, one of the key strategies, if you're trying to preserve content, is to have multiple copies of content, multiple geographies, multiple administrations. That's really one of the pinnacles of a preservation strategy. But yet that's very hard for many organizations to enable, because it requires finding a partner that might want to take a copy of your content and having agreements in place. It requires provisioning special hardware to be able to do that. And so in many cases, checking the preservation box at that level has been very difficult and has not been done by many campuses, except for really mission critical content. Some of the challenges that were cited, though, using cloud, and particularly commercial cloud, is really trusting a third party to manage those critical assets. So if you're using cloud for storage, particularly if it's a commercial provider, how do you trust that that provider is going to do the right thing with the content, that they're going to make sure the content is secure, that they're not going to expose the content or do stuff with the content that is not acceptable to you. And then, of course, with that long-term reliability, as well as security, data security in terms of, again, breaches and security. It's all web-based, so denial of service attacks, things like that. How do we make sure that those are not issues? But even with the challenges, there was still very high interest in looking at cloud for managing digital collections. And the things that were of the highest interest were looking at secondary storage for digital collections. So this is this online archiving and backup that the cloud could provide. So provisioning storage, putting copies of collections there, and being able to check at least part of the preservation box, and then having potentially preservation support around that content. So being able to audit it and check it and make sure that it hasn't changed over time. And then ideally also being able to access that content if needed to make it back, to restore something that was changed in the primary repository, the primary place where the content was stored. Also interesting that came up as a high priority was the ability to share collections both inside and outside the institutions. So many of our researchers collaborate across institutions, and so being able to have a way for them to get access to the content and build collections collaboratively outside of institutional boundaries was really exciting to them as being able to use those capabilities in the cloud. So from this input from our community, we did develop an open source technology, and we have most recently launched a managed service called DuraCloud. And DuraCloud provides our users with a way to implement cloud infrastructure for preservation support and access services. And so at the basic premise, you upload content into DuraCloud, and you can do that directly from your Dspace instance or your Fedora instance, or you can do it from a web-based UI. You upload content, and then you can make multiple copies of the content across several cloud providers. So today, DuraCloud is a platform that resides in the cloud and is hooked up to Amazon, Microsoft, and Rackspace, the three big commercial providers. We are also looking at making connections to consortium cloud providers, as I mentioned, UC San Diego, which runs Chronopolis as a service. And we're also looking at an international network of cloud providers. So looking for partners that are running cloud technologies outside of the US that can provide these cloud-based services. So this provided a pathway for many of our users not only to provide access to their content, but also a step in persisting their content by making multiple copies across multiple geographies, multiple administrations, and to do it fairly easily without having to provision their own capital, provision their own IT infrastructure, and to provision staff to have to manage this content in a very technical way. Once your content is in the cloud, it really opens the doors, though, for doing more of that content, because you can then make that content available outside of certain institutional boundaries that you might face internally. You can give it a HTTP address easily. You can share that content with anybody that you wish. You can share it based on permissions. Once you provide access to that content, they can download it, they can create derivative works from it, and they could use that cloud space to work in collectively. So you can have many institutions accessing that space if you choose to. So you can have a preservation copy, but you can also have an access copy in the cloud. And you can keep that content in sync with your primary content in the repository if you choose to. So we really think the cloud technology becomes an enabling technology. This is just one example, but we do note that there are many projects, not only in the commercial space and in the government space, but also in academia, that are looking at what are best ways to use this cloud technology to extend and expand IT capability. So information technology capability in your own organizations. And so this is one project, but we do believe that there are many more on the horizon that are really going to change the way that we do things in academia, that will reduce barriers to sharing content, reduce barriers for getting applications and systems up and running, because we can provision it quickly and easily, and we can pay for what we use, and we don't pay for what we don't use. Another example that I'll share, many of you are probably, well, some of you might be familiar with Texas Digital Library. They actually hosted the last ETD conference, I believe, in Austin, Texas. And they have a very large program that they actually run statewide in preserving and persisting and providing access to scholarly output from Texas. Excuse me for a minute. And they have 20, I believe it's 27 institutions that they support and manage the scholarly record for, and they do that through Dspace repositories. And about six to 9 months ago, they actually moved their operation into the cloud. They, their first intent was to really have a place, a backup. So they wanted to be able to quickly restore Dspace instances if they went down in their primary IT center. So they wanted to have a backup, a failover position, which was available in the cloud. So if somebody was coming to their institutional repository and for whatever reason it was down at Texas Digital Library, they would then direct them to their Dspace repository in the cloud. So it was really based on backup. But what they found was that working in the cloud technology was so easy. It was so easy for them to add more storage because they just added it as they needed it. They didn't have to buy extra hardware or disk space. And it was easy for them when a new user came into the consortium to throw up another Dspace instance in the cloud, because they could create an image of Dspace and then install it really in minutes, configure the software, that they made the decision to move their whole production and software stack in the cloud. And these are three applications that that they're running. They're running Vario, which is an ETD workflow, which connects directly to Dspace, so making it easier for students to put their ETDs into Dspace and putting it through a workflow which is consistent with the requirements from the Academy. That then deposits the content in Dspace, and then they are currently looking at a backup of that content through DuraCloud, so that it isn't all in one cloud center, that it also copies can go to other cloud centers through the DuraCloud software. So it's interesting to note, I mean, this is an institution which was running it, had provisioned their IT hardware, and they made the decision to put it on the cloud because of flexibility, ease of scalability, and really down the road, cost efficiencies. This is a fairly busy diagram, but for us, you know, we really see an ecosystem, a repository ecosystem developing, where repositories are part of a network of a larger set of software and applications, where people are doing much more with the content. And it is imperative for us at Duraspace, and imperative for you as a stewards of the content, to really start to enable those connections across platforms so that people can really do more with their content. And so what we have here is Dspace, and we're working on connecting it to Fedora, so Fedora can be a back-end repository. If people are interested, content can be pushed into DuraCloud, which then can go to multiple cloud providers, and we hope even private cloud consortiums as they emerge. And then on the front end, we have different platforms that improve access to the content, improve the workflow to the content. On the back end, we have places where you can store and persist the content directly from these repository systems. So don't build your repository as an island, but really look to other technologies, web-enabled services that are out there that can really make your content more available, more persistent, and to be able to do it collaboratively. So I'll end with, what the vision is at Duraspace, and really my personal vision is that together we can move towards global and persistent access to the scholarly record that transcends institutional boundaries, so that we're not locking up content within our institutions, and that this is really part of the fabric of the web. So we really embrace the web and what has become available, as opposed to run away from the web. And that will require some new thinking on many's part to figure out how can we really connect and expose our content in ways that we didn't think of before, but in ways which our users, be it our faculty and staff, and really the broader academic community expects of us. Okay, so I'd like to say thank you and open it up for questions.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes for questions. So, Michele, would you like us to just take the questions and then you could respond to them afterwards?
All right, it doesn't matter.
Yeah?
I'm not good at keeping all the questions in my head.
Okay,
So
shall we do them one by one? Okay, there's a question over there.
Can't see them. In front there.
My name is Peter Schimber from Humboldt University in Berlin. Michele, could you tell us a little bit more about the next developments of Dspace and Fedora?
Sure. There is a current release, as we speak, being tested right now of Dspace 1.8, so that is the one directly that's going to be available in the next month. And in the short term, the features of Dspace 1.8 include tools which allow users to curate their content, in other words, do bit integrity checking and preservation services within the Dspace interface. And also there are multimedia, what we call multimedia RSS feeds, which allow you to push audio and video to places like iTunes U, but certainly others that follow an RSS feed API. So those are on the short term. In the long term, we are really looking at taking the Dspace software and breaking it into more modular components that control ingest, workflow, management, and storage and preservation, and having web APIs, so programmatic interfaces to all those components, which will make it much easier to connect with many of these web applications I've talked about. But as the Duraspace organization, we can only promote this vision and advocate that the communities really take hold of this. We really rely on the communities to set the priorities and also to write the code. So that is why we hope that people will share our vision. In the Fedora platform, it is already a modular platform. So what we have really focused on is integration with other applications, be it Drupal, which is the Islandora application that's Drupal and Fedora stack. There is also a large project called Hydra, which is the ability to put many different heads on Fedora. So they've developed 3 or 4 different platforms which sit on top of Fedora, which provide different workflows and different access. And So really the overall focus for us in terms of the technical perspective is integration. Integration between Dspace and Fedora, integration with other software technologies out there, and to make it easier and more available for our communities to really
Hi, Michelle. I'm John Hagan from West Virginia University.
Hi, John.
Hi. And so I just saw you had mentioned the preservation piece and the logs model, and so I just wanted to let you know that actually this community has taken some active steps. The NDLT has formed a partnership with the Meta Archive Cooperative. I don't know if Gail McMillan, there she is, maybe you can speak a little more to this, but it's basically distributed kind of preservation across multiple sites, and so I thought that was very good that we're following in this pattern, or one of the many options in terms of preservation.
Yeah, and Meta Archive is a great example of a community that's come together around collaborative preservation. So I know Gail's going to speak about it later, but it's being able to really use the community effectively and deploying a technology where you can share, you have that shared responsibility of collectively preserving content. And it is also, that content persists not only in your primary repository, but then persists in Meta Archive. But Meta Archive is also a great example where I do see down the road, I know the LOCKS group, and we've talked very closely with them, and we've also talked with Meta Archive folks in making it easier for somebody to provision a LOCKS box. How do you get that LOCKS box in the cloud so that smaller institutions can get up and running quickly without a lot of IT infrastructure? And so that is a project that's actually going on too.
Hey, Michelle. Martin Halbert, University of North Texas. There was a conference earlier this year that was sponsored by the Library of Congress and the Meta Archive Cooperative called Aligning National Approaches to Digital Preservation. And some of the issues that came up there that were interesting was the legal issues in moving data across different repositories across national boundaries. And I wondered if in any of the work that you've done in DuraCloud and some of the international partnerships that you're describing, if you were looking at the legal issues and moving things from public entities in one national polity situation to others, and if those posed any sort of problems that you were seeing.
Yeah, so certainly for us where we support a global community, one of the issues has been using cloud technologies that are not in their local environment. So for example, Canada will not put any of their content in the United States because of the Patriot Act, which basically allows the government to go in and to find out who's been accessing the content and where the content's coming from. And so, but also there's restrictions on moving content out of your country domain for similar reasons. And so where we've started, at least in terms of our positioning for Duraspace, is really with the open cultural heritage materials that are already getting broad public access. But we are looking at, on our roadmap for cloud technologies, how do we not only set up distributed centers across the world, and that's where I talk about the partnerships. So looking for a partner in Canada, looking for a partner in France, looking for a partner in Germany to deploy these technologies at scale, which then the community can collaborate and participate in. But also looking at policy layers that can dictate where the content might be stored based on the policy associated with it. And we're collaborating actually with folks that are strong in that area from the IRADS community because they've put some of this policy infrastructure in place. So those are things that have absolutely come up. We don't have the answers, but we're hoping to develop more robust solutions as this technology becomes further along.
Hi, I'm I'm Wouter Klaffek from Stellenbosch University. I've got a question about if you're an institution and you want to start hosting like a DuraCloud service, if you've got any business models which make sense to help an institution recover cost and make it not too expensive for other institutions to participate.
Right, that's an excellent question. We today haven't developed, I mean, there is a business model around DuraCloud. As we run it as a managed service, it is, we do charge for the service. There's a flat fee for using the services, and then there's what we call a pass-through cost of the storage and compute. So we've developed a business model, and we're happy to share that and share the success or not success as we get more and more users in our community. In terms of deploying DuraCloud locally, what you really need to consider if you deploy it locally, what are the, how can your data center scale to support that, and do you connect with other providers, or you're going to run it all internally in your own data center? And then, what are your internal costs for being able to do that? But what we're trying to do is really be very in line with what cloud costs are, and I think that's, if you can pass on and not add to what this cloud infrastructure cost is, that's really where you have a win-win. But if you're interested in Cellbach, I'd be happy to talk more to you about what we've done and what we've learned.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm Jamal Salmi from Sultanate of Oman, which is one of the Gulf states. I'm asking about these softwares, especially Dspace, if they provide support to other language, especially Arabic language. Thank you.
Yeah, there's, I'm pretty sure there's a translation pack for the Arabic language, because I've seen Dspace in Arabic. There are, there's over, 30 languages. There's a translation pack that's available. You can find it on the Dspace site and the Dspace wiki, and that translates your site. I'm almost positive it's available in Arabic. Probably Irina, if she's here, knows even better than I, because she's works to support many of that group.
Okay, we can take one more question. Nothing else? Well then, please join me in giving Michele one more round of applause.